Hey internet, Oryx speaking. In my friend group, I have this one friend who refuses to touch a game that has a crosshair and involves aiming. And when I asked about it, the reason is because he has bad aim. Now obviously I'm not going to force him to play games that he doesn't want to, but it did get me thinking about how most people who are not familiar with the craft think of aim as this end-all be-all. You either are good at aiming or you're not. And with as most things in life, that could not be farther from the truth. So today I'd like to educate you in a little bit of aiming, the individual components, what makes up good aim, and how people could have vastly different skills in aiming to the point where one player could be an excellent sniper in one game, but a horrible sniper in another. First, we need to understand that aim is built up by a bunch of individual characteristics. There are about 6 to 7 individual components to aim, depending on the game and also depending on who you ask, of which 4 to 5 are in a complete vacuum, strictly tied to the crosshair and the target. Now, the first thing that most people think of when they think of aim is crazy flicks, which is when you take the crosshair from one spot and go as quickly as you can to another precise spot. Now, a lot of people get this confused, but flicking in and of itself is not a big enough category to define itself. So flicking is actually a subcategory of what we call clicking. Every time you just use your computer and move the mouse cursor from one spot to another, moving the cursor to highlight a text document or click on the X button, that is all clicking practice. Because just because you flick from one spot to another doesn't mean anything will happen. You have to click with good timing. So like I said, most people in the aiming community classify flicking as a subcategory of clicking. The next component to aim is known as tracking. Tracking is the skill that allows you to follow a target while it's moving in a 3D environment. Clicking and tracking are two very different skills, and someone who is good at clicking may not necessarily always be good at tracking, and vice versa. For instance, if you play games like CSGO or Valorant, these are games that specialize in emphasizing clicking, compared to a game like Apex Legends, which emphasizes tracking on ARs, SMGs, and even some semi-autos like the Wingman. The next and last component to aim in a vacuum is known as switching, which is the skill to follow a target for a short amount of time and then switch to another target quickly with a short amount of time. If you think of clicking as accuracy, tracking as smoothness, switching is control, being able to quickly go from tracking a target to switching to another target to tracking that target. If you've ever played like Deathmatch Call of Duty, where you're constantly going from one target to another, this is the kind of aim that you are developing. Now that we've covered the 3 basics of aim, there are a few other components that determines aim, which are game specific. The next category of aim would be movement. Now when it comes to movement, every game is different. In a game like Apex, where you're trying to constantly move around and be unpredictable as possible, you need to have a good marriage of your aim and your movement coming together. That way you could shoot your opponents while still being somewhat mobile. Valorant's movement is even more tied to the aim, albeit in a completely different way. In Valorant, you have to be perfectly standing still in order to shoot an accurate shot. So being able to move around the map efficiently while being able to stop and engage in a good position at the drop of a hat is a fairly difficult skill that takes a while to develop. Hey, real quick voiceover arc here. I just covered the game movement specific part, but there's also a game weapon specific part. Different games have different gun mechanics. So burst weapons, spray control, and recoil control are just a few things that you have to keep in mind. There's a saying in the gaming community, if you want to practice your aim specifically, use an aim trainer. But if you want to practice a game, well, you better play the game. There's no better practice when learning a specific game than to play inside of the game's engine. So aim training is very important, but your aim will always be limited by how compatible that aim is with the in-game mechanics of whatever game you are playing. So, food for thought. Now let's quickly run through the last 2 categories. First up, the peripherals, which mainly constitute of the mouse and the monitor. I'm not terribly qualified when it comes to the technical aspect of monitors and mice. There's a lot more that goes into the shape of the mouse, the weight of the mouse, and the sensor that's in the mouse. And if you're really curious about all the specs and the individual characteristics from one mouse to another, I'll be sure to drop a few videos in the description so that way you could educate yourself. But while we're on the topic of mice, let's talk about sensitivity. Higher sensitivity and higher DPI, the easier it is for you to flick. The lower the sensitivity, the easier it is to track and also be precise. As general advice, you start at a low sensitivity and work your way upward. And how high you raise the sensitivity will depend on the game as well as your own aiming preference. And for the monitor, tracking could be so much easier or so much harder. Tracking on a 60Hz monitor is infinitely harder than tracking on a 144, and I'm going to assume a 240. I don't have a 240. For the monitor, you'll want something that has a quick response time, so anything 1 millisecond or less. Having a computer that's powerful enough to run all of those frames, and of course if you plan to do anything else with it, you might want to have a few bells and whistles on top of it. Again, I'll leave a few videos down in the description if you're curious about studying a little bit more. And lastly, the final category, which is the aiming style, which is whether you use fingers to aim, your wrist to aim, your elbow to aim, or a combination of some or the other. Again, I'm not terribly qualified to talk about this. There are a lot of good YouTubers and YouTube videos videos talking about the differences between claw grip and palm grip and finger aiming and wrist aiming and all of the above. For this overview video, I would just say find a grip that's comfortable to you and then do some research on optimizing your specific aiming preferences. So hopefully now you understand that there's a lot more than just good aim. And this video is just scratching the surface. Each individual topic mentioned in this video can be dissected into a bunch of smaller, more precise, and more insightful understanding. All this video was supposed to do was help you understand the big major components. That way, if you ever want to study more, you'll have something to go off of. Hopefully this video made a little bit of sense and you got something out of it. And if it did, be sure to leave a like. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, be sure to subscribe. I'll see you guys all next time. Thanks for watching.